This video is the beginner's guide to the AR-15. I'm gonna break down the components, loading sequence, everything you need to know about the AR-15 platform, so stay tuned.
Yeah, the other teams are moving in the background,
All right, welcome back. Like I said, this is the beginner's guide to the AR-15 platform. I'm gonna discuss the components, kind of cycle operation, how to load it, press check, you name it, everything you need to know about this weapon system, we're going to discuss. Before we break down the components, just know that there are two main kind of areas when it comes to the AR-15, right? You have the lower receiver, and then you have the upper receiver, right? Interesting note, I'll grab this kind of lower receiver here. This right here is the lower receiver. Everything else, the buttstock, buffer tube, hand guard, trigger guard, all that stuff are accessories. This is the only piece that needs to be bought from a certified firearms dealer or at a gun shop, right? So once you have this in your possession, everything else can literally be shipped to your house, right? So that's pretty cool as well. Now, let's transition over to the table because I'm going to walk you through all the components and kind of break down this weapon system for you. All right, let's take this bad boy apart and kind of talk about the components. Just real quick before I do so, just know that these are the kind of the breakout, right? So you have the lower receiver, which sits here, and the upper receiver. In order to take it apart, it's basically got two pins. You pull those out, and it comes apart into two different areas, right? We have the upper receiver, which we'll get to here in a minute, and then we have the lower receiver, which we'll talk about real quick, right? So this is the lower receiver. Starting at the back here, of course, we have our buttstock, which is collapsible. It sits on the buffer tube or held in place by the buffer tube, and inside of the buffer tube, you have your buffer and buffer spring, right? That is what makes this weapon system so easy to shoot, right? As you're firing this thing, the bolt carrier group hits the buffer and the buffer spring and absorbs all that energy, right? It's not like shooting a shotgun or shooting a bolt gun where, you know, like a hunting rifle where all that energy is going back in your shoulder. This thing is super, super light to shoot. It's almost like shooting a BB gun, right? Super, super, super soft. Of course, it's very loud, but super, super easy to shoot. Moving along here, of course, we got our selector switch, our bolt catch. Inside of here, we have our trigger group, which this on top here is the actual hammer that hits the firing pin and makes the thing go boom. Moving along to this side here, we have our magazine release, of course, our takedown pins, our trigger, our pistol grip, and our trigger guard, right? Those are the main components to the lower receiver. All right, let's transition to the upper. All right, perfect. Now let's talk about the upper receiver, right? The upper receiver is actually just this part here. Everything else are accessories or other parts that go onto the upper receiver, right? So starting with the upper receiver itself, inside of the upper receiver is the bolt carrier group, right? So we pull that out. You have the bolt carrier. You have your bolt, which is this piece here. It actually is just about this big. You have your firing pin inside, right? This is what actually makes the bullet go boom and assist with the cycle of operations, right? Which we'll get to here in a minute. Inside of that, we have our charging handle. This is a key tool or key part of this weapon system. You'll use it to load, clear malfunctions, clear the weapon. You'll use this every time you fire this weapon system, most likely than not. Moving along, on this side here, we have the forward assist. What that does is if your bolt carrier group doesn't go all the way in, you actually tap on that. It actually has a little tip inside that actually pushes that forward and seats the actual bolt and actually locks it in place. On this side here, we have the ejection port cover. And then moving towards the front, we have our hand guards. These are BCM hand guards, free-floating hand guards. I love these things because you can actually place it on a hard surface, put your sling real tight, and it won't affect the barrel harmonics or throw around. Inside of that is the barrel. I don't know if you can see it through the hand guards, but the barrel sits inside. At the very end of it, then you're going to need, obviously, some kind of muzzle brake. If you go with the traditional kind of bird cage, military style, that's fine. This is a surefire one. I love it because it's ported and actually helps with the recoil management of it. Other than that, those are kind of the main components. Oh, one last thing. There is a gas tube in here and a gas key. I actually have one pulled out from another AR that I'm building, but we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a key function or a key part that makes this weapon system operate, right? This particular one. Other than that, there's just a few other components, right? Of course, I need a sight, the Surefire 6-hour Romeo, right? This thing is great because I actually can leave this on. It'll shut off as soon as it senses motion. It activates by itself. Some backup iron sights, right? These are actually Magpul. They're plastic, but they're called iron sights. And then I have a light on here, right? Because this is a tactical rifle, so I need some kind of light on there. Those are pretty much the basic components, right, to the AR-15 platform. Putting this thing back together is super easy. Simply insert the charging handle, grab your bolt carrier group, make sure that the bolt is all the way forward, slide that back boy back in there. Simply put the two halves back together, put the pins in, and we are back in business, and that is pretty much it. All right, perfect. Now that we kind of know the components and every kind of thing that goes on the AR-15, let's talk about the two main types of AR-15 platforms. You're going to have what's called your direct impingement, which is this variant here. Then you have your piston-operated AR-15 platforms, right? They both use gases from the round you just fired, right? So on both variants, there's a small hole on the top of the barrel, kind of in this area here, that some of the gases are diverted up. The two main differences on this one, which is direct impingement, has a gas tube that sits inside of there. I don't know if you can see this. There's a small little hole right here. Let me clip on it so you can see it. Right. Well, anyways, right there. What that does is, as it fires the round, some of that gases go through that gas tube. It actually goes into the gas key, which sits on the top of the bolt carrier group, and it actually pushes the bolt carrier group back. Of course, it'll hit the buffer spring and then ride back forward, right? So that is the direct impingement variant of the AR-15 platform. The other variant is the piston-operated variant. Similar to this, some of the gases are leaked up through the small hole in the barrel. The main difference is there's actually a piston mechanism right about here. What that does is that gases charge that piston, and that piston pushes back a rod that actually does the same function as those gases are doing, but just with a piston. The pros and cons to each, right? Obviously, these have been around for a long time, so they're definitely time tested and proven, and very reliable. They are a little bit dirty, though. You get a lot of carbon buildup, all that stuff, because all that carbon, all that extra gas are coming back towards you, which is one of the negatives of that, right? The piston-operated ones are much cleaner because basically all the gases stay up front and you don't deal with all that excess gas coming back, right? I have one of each. I have gas-operated and piston-operated. I love them both, so that's going to be on you. Just you're going to have to play around with them and see which one you like best, right? So those are the two main variants to the AR-15 platform. All right, so now that we understand kind of basically what the components are, how this works, let's talk about loading and getting this weapon system ready to fire, right? So a couple of ways to load it. I like to load on a bolt back, so I'm going to use the bolt catch. I'm going to use my charging handle. I'm going to rack it to the rear and have an open bolt, right? The bolt's locked to the rear. At that point, I'm going to grab my magazine. I am using dummy rounds just to be safe because I am at home. I'm going to insert the magazine all the way in. I'm going to tug. Then I'm going to hit the bolt release, right? I actually have a Magpul bad lever on here so I can use my finger and just ride the bolt forward. And now I am good to go, right? If that was a live round, all I would need to do is shoulder the weapon, change my selector switch from safe to fire, and take my shots, right? That is pretty much it. There's a couple things to do every time you load it. I like to do a press check. So there's two variants for that, right? So I can ride the bolt slightly to the rear. If that were a live round, I would actually see brass right there. At nighttime, I can actually feel with my finger inside on the bolt face to make sure that there is a piece of brass there. And then I'm going to release the charging handle and tap the forward assist. That is one variant. The other variant to do a press check to ensure that you are loaded is if you loaded a 30-round magazine, your rounds are going to be on the right side of the magazine, right? So if I look, I have my round, my top round is on the right side of my magazine. Insert, load, remove the magazine, and now my rounds are on the left side. I know that one round was chambered because it didn't magically disappear, right? So those are two variants to loading and doing a proper press check on the AR-15 platform, right? Unloading is super simple. Remove the source of ammunition. lock the bolt to the rear, you will have a round eject right there. I don't know if you saw it, went right past the camera. I'm gonna visually inspect the chamber, visually inspect the ejection port, release the bolt, make sure that the weapon is on safe, and now I have a clear and safe weapon, right? So a few other things I want to add before we kind of close out the video, right? So number one is it's talking about zeroing or kind of aligning the sights, right? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it because I did a full video on that. Check that one out because I kind of walked through the process of what's happening as you're zeroing this weapon system. Basically, you're aligning the trajectory of your bullet with the line of sight of your optic, right? So check out that video. I explain everything on how to zero your weapon system. And then the last thing I want to talk about is kind of employing this weapon system in a tactical manner, right? Again, I'm not going to go through it. I did a video on the tactical carbine, how to hold it, how to employ this weapon system. Check that one out as well because I lay down kind of everything you need to know when it comes to how to employ this weapon system in a tactical manner, right? So that is the AR-15 platform. Like I said, one of my favorite tactical rifles ever created. If you found this information valuable, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as it truly does help. With that, stay safe and train hard.